Hello, it's Lion here with Hobbies of Man once again, and today we're going to be doing another book review. Today we're going to be looking at Akahoshi Sci-Fi book club titled Devils and Angels. The Akahoshi book club part is actually the title of the series. The title of this book is Devil and Angels, and it's written by Antonio Blanco. This is a self-published work, but it has a few little bells and whistles that make it seem kind of like more traditionally published. Like the fact that it has a little label down here and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. This is a 16 plus title. This is kind of more or less a YA title. I think there's some sort of labeling here that denotes teenage demographic. I'm not really sure. There's like a T back here. I don't know what that's supposed to be, but it's there. But I personally will put this in the 16 plus range, kind of like most ecchi manga, right? And this is very heavily manga inspired. This is technically a light novel, or an original English light novel. And the genres for this are sci-fi, fantasy, adventure, school, romance, harem, and ecchi, as it says back here in the back of the book. And it does not have an adaptation, although I think this would be pretty good as a comic. I think it would work well. And off the bat, the rating for this is a 4 out of 5. This is kind of interesting. It's an original English light novel. It does have a lot of Japanese tropes, and it does broadly feel like it happens in Japan, because it kind of does. The setting and the way that the characters speak is very Japanese feeling, but all of the writing style is very Western. So usually I get this kind of dissonance when I'm reading original English light novels, because it feels like I'm reading caricatures of light novels instead of a light novel, right? In this case, I don't feel like I'm reading a caricature, but I don't truly feel like I'm reading a light novel. There's something about the way they're written that kind of has a special vibe to it, a specific vibe to it, not necessarily better or worse. But this definitely feels like a very, classic, standard sci-fi Western book. It just happens to have a lot of stuff that is Japanese. So, that might be good for some of you. That might be bad for some of you. For me, it is what it is. I don't really have a personal preference. But the book was good. I did enjoy it. So don't think that I'm saying this as a way to dislike the book, if that makes sense. It's just an observation so that you guys, the viewers, can kind of better decide if you're going to want to read this book, right? So, yeah, moving on from that, let's get into the premise. So I can't really think of a good way to sum this up, so I'm just going to read the back of the book here, which is maybe something I should do for more books, but I don't know. So the back of the book reads as follows. Kouki, Akahoshi is a frail and sick boy who witnessed a battle between angels and devils in the sky, but not everything is as it seems. He starts his first year of high school in Kawafutago, Japan. However, rumors from his past follow him, resulting in him being ostracized and bullied by his classmates. Then, by fate and device, he meets several girls who help him start a school club, the science fiction reading club, but his life is less than peaceful. He and the girls are launched into the world of adventure, intrigue, and danger. A world where extraterrestrials with unique powers have lived hidden from humanity for thousands of years. They are devils and angels. And that's a pretty good way of summarizing this book. It's pretty enticing. But broadly, the story is about this guy. He ends up meeting some girls who happen to be extraterrestrial in nature, and he ends up going to school with them, and hijinks ensue. It's very similar to something like High School DxD, or like True Love Ru. Has a little bit of a Haruhi Suzumiya feel to it. It also reminds me a little bit of Toradora and other kind of romance light novels like that. So I think it pulls from a lot of very, kind of interesting, meaningful light novels, but it does have its own kind of spin to it. And I liked it. So, yeah, I'm going to show you the cover about it, or the cover of it, right there. And the back. These are all more or less all of the main characters that show up. And this is the main character up there, if you guys can see him. Yeah, there you go. And generally speaking, I don't really like this art style, but I don't dislike it all that much now that I've thought about it a little bit. I think that there's a good function to it, which is it lets you really know what all of these characters look like, more so than like a Japanese style manga drawing. But the fact that they're kind of 3D rendered makes it a little uncomfortable to look at sometimes, just because of that uncanny valley feel. So, you know, it is what it is. So let's move on here. The plot line here is quite good. It's pretty solid. It has a very clear through line, and it's mostly a social, like, school relationship type story, plot line as well. That happens to kind of slowly build up the fact that there's this kind of like incoming conflict between all of these different extraterrestrials and Earth that's going to have to happen in some sort of shadow war situation here, which is pretty interesting. I quite like that. So, yeah, Koiki somehow kind of ends up seeing a battle that he shouldn't have seen. Basically, he finds these special glasses that are some sort of alien technology that allows him to see things he shouldn't, things that are hidden from the average person. He puts them on. He sees these gorgeous girls fighting in the sky. And then he sees that one of them was beaten and has fallen, right? So he goes and he saves her. And he takes her to his home. And he takes care of her for the first bit of the book. Eventually she wakes up and she gets better and she leaves. And somehow this same girl ends up at his school the next day. Well, then she befriends him and they start a book club, specifically a science fiction book club focusing on Western science fiction. This leads into this kind of harem situation and these revelations about the reality of humanity and the fact that there's these otherworldly beings and that there's been this kind of Cold War happening between all of these associations, all of these groups, and that there's a new third party moving in, or maybe I guess it'd be like a fourth or fifth party moving in, and they might end up causing some sort of issues, you know, further on, which is kind of interesting. And then we have to see some kind of hidden struggles for power here. Then we also learn about these people called the Inquisitors that we're kind of unclear about, but there really is no true villain in this first book. It is mostly about the interpersonal conflict. The fact that Koiki is a lonely boy, but he's lonely for a reason. He chose to be lonely because of his past and the fact that he really doesn't think that he has much time left to live because of an accident that happened to him as a child. So he pushed everyone away, and somehow he's being pulled back into society by these girls that are around him, and he's becoming friends with them. And besides that, there's also that kind of like, oh crap, all of these girls are aliens and they're all really hot and they all have special powers. What do I do with myself? What do I do with my life? And what do I do about them and how I feel about them, right? And I generally find these types of books really enjoyable. So I had a lot of fun with this, but I do understand that mileage may vary. You know, reading the title of the book, you might think that it's kind of like a Haruhi Suzumiya type thing. But it does kind of feel like it's leading up to more of an action type series. It's like, except it's kind of like a slow build, if that makes sense. So there you go. In terms of characters, I think this is both the best part of the story and also kind of the worst part, because the fact that it's an interpersonal relationship type story means that the characters have to be very solid and have to be interesting, and most of all have to be consistent. And I think that's part where Antonio kind of has a problem here and there, because sometimes I think the characters are a little bit too consistent, and sometimes I think the characters maybe are consistent, but the way that they're supposed to be acting isn't well explained, and so that causes some issues, right? So let me kind of define this a little bit clearly here. So there's this main girl, right? Her name is Mirai, and she is the devil girl that you know, he saved at the beginning of the story. He accidentally keeps her special suit that she's wearing here, that kind of black latex suit there, and he doesn't give it to her until about halfway through the book, right? And she initially gets closer to him to figure out what's going on, why he helped her, and also to figure out if he took her suit, right? Technically, he did take it, but it was for a good reason, and he didn't give it back to her for like convoluted plot reasons, right? But the whole time that happens, you know, between the moment that he took her suit off and the moment that he gives it back to her, she's very flip-floppy or wishy-washy with her emotions and her preference and the way that she interacts with him. Well, the way she interacts with him stays consistent, but the reasons why she's interacting with him don't feel genuinely kind of explained, if that makes sense. Like, technically, you as a reader can surmise that she's playing the long game. She's conning him, right? She's trying to get close to him and playing on the fact that she's a beautiful girl and he's a kind of loser kid in order to befriend him and then, you know, take him down and get her suit back. But that's not actually ever made clear. She never actually enunciates this. Like, she never actually explains this to herself, which is something that most books would do. And she also isn't very clearly feeling like that most of the time. It only happens every once in a while. She's like, you know, very friendly with him. She acts very positively. She does a lot of good things with him. And her internal monologue is about her enjoying her time with him. But then for some reason she randomly flip-flops to hating his guts and not being happy that she's around him because she's trying to find her suit, right? And then she flip-flops back into enjoying her time with him. And then once he gives her back the suit, that is resolved. So that goes away. That issue no longer exists. But the fact that it existed for half of the book makes it kind of difficult to enjoy this character because I don't really understand where she's coming from, right? Because it's not clearly explained, if that makes sense. The other character that's a little bit too consistent is Yama, Yaya, I think her name is. Whatever. This girl here with the orange hair. She's a very nice girl. Her backstory makes a lot of sense. But she has this kind of like character trait, which is that she cries very easily. Now, technically, she is supposed to be some sort of empath character. So it makes sense that she would have strong emotional like outbursts if she's feeling all of the emotions of other people. But because of her backstory, it feels like she should have a tougher time crying because she has gone through so many difficult things, and so she should be a little bit more hardened about her emotions, right? So the fact that she can burst into tears very easily is a little bit odd for me in terms of characterization, mostly because the way it's described feels like she's like bawling her eyes out, like she's experiencing the worst pain, physical and emotional ever, even though what she's really feeling is someone else's pain that really is kind of like average pain, or, you know, something that everyone goes through that most people wouldn't really react that heavily to. And she does this a few times in the book, and I think that for me that feels a little bit too extra, if that makes sense. And the fact that it's a consistent trait makes it difficult to kind of engage with this character sometimes. But that is mostly my opinion. You know, some people might be like, yeah, this is good. I really enjoy that this character shows her emotions so clearly so often. But to me, it just kind of doesn't like fit into the other facts of her character, if that makes sense. So, yeah. And finally, I think that the character of Koiki's mother is a little bit weird to me. But I guess that if she's modeled after the mother in Toradora, it kind of makes sense. But to me, it feels a little bit too easy, too contrived, that she's happy that her son has so many, female friends so quickly, and that they all seem to be like his girlfriends and stuff like that. Not that there's anything wrong with having multiple girlfriends or anything like that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the way that she acts is kind of counterintuitive to what you would think a standard parent would act like. And I understand that sometimes there has to be contrivances for the sake of the plot. But this one feels a little bit too easy. With the background story that Koiki and his mother have, it would make sense for her to, internally monologue about the fact that, after such loneliness that he has experienced, it's good that he finally has, interest in girls again or something like that. Something to kind of connect the fact that she's okay with it with their previous experience. And I think that's mostly the issue. A lot of these characters have these kind of tics and kind of situations that make sense, but they're never actually linked together to their background. And I think that that's kind of something that Antonio needs to develop a little bit, right? So that's really it for that. In terms of world building, I think it's pretty good. There's 3 different groups. There's humans, there's angels, it's like AEN or ANG-ELS, and dev-els, which are DEV-EL. Which are basically angels and devils, right? And there's this 4th group coming up, which are the Inquisitors. And we also learned that mythology is basically alien-human hybrids. It kind of feels a little bit like the a lot of the junk that is spewed on the Ancient Aliens type of, shows. But for a fantasy story, it works really, really well. I mean, it makes sense. It makes total sense. I've seen it happen in other stories, like The Lorien Legacies, which is a book that kind of fell out of style for a while. But I really enjoyed it when I was a teenager. The first book was I Am Number 4, right? And part of the background story for that is that there's these aliens that have specific powers, and these aliens would come to Earth every once in a while, and a lot of them happen to be mistaken for gods because of their special powers, right? And I think there was this one thing where, like, the main hero character was actually mistaken for, like, Zeus or something. I don't remember, but it's a thing that I've seen before that works well for fantasy stories, for science fiction stories. So I really don't have an issue with it. I just think it's interesting, and I thought that the comparison to Ancient Aliens was kind of funny there, right? So yeah, there's also alien-human hybrids, which also kind of tie into the mythology aspect, and overall it's pretty good. There's also these hidden organizations, kind of similar to the organization that would run Stargate, like the Stargate system in the Stargate franchise. I don't know, Stargate Command or something like that. I don't remember what it was called, but the people that would live in that mountain where the Stargate situations would occur, right? So overall, pretty good. In terms of art and fan service, well, I really mentioned the art. It's not necessarily my favorite, and I do think that some of the interior illustrations are actually pretty good. I like some of them, but some of them are also not that enjoyable. Like, see, this one's not that great. I don't really like it. It's kind of weird. It does match what's happening in the chapter, don't get me wrong, but it's not something that really appeals to me. And this one's not too bad. Let's see if I can find another one. This one's pretty good too, so it's hit or miss here depending on what's happening here. I think sometimes it is like, drawn in 2D, and sometimes it is rendered stuff, and depending on what it is, kind of depends on how the illustration hits, right? But the art style is definitely not something that works for me, but because this is a self-published work, it's not an issue for me. It's just something that I really didn't find enjoyable, even if I totally understand why the situation happened that caused Antonio to decide that rendering 3D art styles was the right move, right? Like, it's not a complaint per se. It's an observation about my preferences, if that makes sense. So yeah, in terms of fan service, there really isn't anything too egregious. It's mostly just kind of like your standard, like, oh, he saw her in her underwear, or, he noticed that her boobs were big, or stuff like that, right? Nothing too serious, nothing that is super, egregious, or at least in terms of, like, Japanese stuff. And there really is no intimacy scenes, if that makes sense. So, yeah, for me, it's pretty average. It's not anything super raunchy. It's not anything, PG. It's kind of just in the middle. It's pretty good. And for a rating, like I said, it's a 4 out of 5. There's some small issues. Mostly the characterization is what mostly drops the pointage down. But other than that, there really are some very minor situations here. First of all, the dialogue of the characters sometimes just doesn't feel like real people, at least not like real teenagers, right? There's no contractions. They never say you all, or couldn't, or shouldn't. They always say could not, would not, is not, right? And most teenagers don't really talk like that. Most people actually, yeah, I think honestly most people don't really talk like that unless they're supposed to be very proper people. And that could work, but the problem is that everyone talks like that. So it makes it feel very rote, I guess. Like, it doesn't work. It doesn't feel like they are individuals, if that makes sense. And the other thing is that sometimes the way that sentences are structured doesn't really make sense. Like, this feels very, and like, I notice it because when I've written before, as someone that comes from a non-American background, I'm from Mexico, and I learned Spanish at the same time I learned English. I notice sometimes that when I write something, I accidentally write it in the word order in Spanish, and then in English it sounds kind of off. It sounds backwards, right? And I've noticed a few times in this book that kind of happened, where, like, if you say in English, the house is red, then he would write the red house, which, you know, works well in either case for this instance, but sometimes the word order makes it sound odd. And I noticed a few of times that it happened, and it kind of took me out a little bit because I was like, oh, that's really weird to word it like that. So that's really all the complaint there. So overall, I enjoyed the story a lot. I liked most of the characters, but the characterization was a little bit inconsistent, or maybe it wasn't that it was inconsistent, it was that it was too... It wasn't well established enough. Sometimes the way the characters acted didn't really match with their background, and so there wasn't a cohesion between them. And some of the word choices and the way that things were explained kind of was a little bit off in terms of like how the vocabulary was used, not necessarily that it wasn't well explained, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's my review for Akahoshi Sci-Fi Book Club. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you thought. I will leave Antonio Blanco's information down in the description if you guys are interested in checking out his book. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.